Shadow of Truth, and today is Monday, May the 23rd, 2016, and your hosts are Dave Kranzler from InvestmentResearchDynamics.com and Rory Hall from thedailycoin.org, and here we go. Yeah, I mean, if you're not buying gold and silver from dealers that you know, then, send me an email. I'll make a recommendation. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. Just don't be stupid and don't buy into this nonsense. I mean, is the market being flooded with gold and silver counterfeits? I haven't seen any. I talked to Andy Hoffman earlier. They're a bullion dealer. They haven't seen any. I'm going to talk to Doc hopefully later this week over at SD Bullion. I bet you $1 to a dime, they haven't seen any either. I mean, these are reputable dealers who know what they're getting, and they aren't buying nonsense.
Well, they're buying their eagles directly from their gold eagles directly from the mint distributors.
Exactly, which is reputable. So, these propaganda pieces like this, like I said, they're designed to scare people. They're designed specifically to scare new investors, new people with all the news that's been about gold and silver in the first 2 or 3 months of this year, because they've been the only asset that's actually shown a profit. I mean, people are starting to look at it, not to mention the fact that their fiat currency, worthless nothing, they're figuring that out also. So,
I don't think it's coincidental that all of a sudden this propaganda hits at a time when the Federal Reserve officials are coming out threatening to raise interest rates as well, and I think they're specifically targeting gold, because I went and I looked at it, and last Monday is when all of a sudden the parade of regional Fed presidents started coming out saying, we're raising rates in June. This is a live meeting. Gold's down 3.5% since last Monday. And they have to be targeting gold. And what's hilarious, and there's an article on investing.com right now, gold falls to 3-week lows amid continued hawkish sentiments from the Fed. Well, that's a bunch of BS, because here's what, as it turns out, when there's been interest rate hike cycles in the past, gold actually does well.
There you have it. Yeah,
it does really well. Because here's what it hinges on. It hinges on real interest rates, not nominal interest rates. The Fed funds rate is a nominal interest rate. Okay, so they raise it from 50 basis points to 75 basis points. It's still less than 1%. You've got true inflation running at least 6 to 7%, probably higher. But if you still have negative interest rates.
Right.
And when they start raising interest rates historically, it's because they're worried about inflation. Well, I don't know why they're threatening to raise rates now. I mean, we already have serious inflation in our system.
Yes,
even though they want to tell us that it's 2% inflation. Well, that's a bunch of nonsense. The real interest rates are minus 5%. If you want to just use 6% as the real inflation rate, it's probably higher. And that's why the price of gold tends to rally when they start raising interest rates. And it takes the type of move that Volcker made in 1981, when he jacked rates up to 18%.
Yep.
And that's what broke the run in gold back then.
And it'll probably have to be higher than that, don't you think? I mean, if we start with, like you said, if we're in negative interest rates right now, we're at least at zero. And they weren't anywhere near zero or negative in 1980-81 when Volcker, unleashed interest on the American people. I mean, it just squelched gold at that point. I mean, don't you think that it would have to be in the 20s, mid-20s, high 20s, or no? Or is it even important?
I don't know. I
It would be a lot.
I think they'd have to jack up rates to at least somewhere between 6 and 10% right now in order to really have an effect on the price of gold. If that's their goal in coming out and saying they're raising rates to try and get the price of gold down, and I think that's a big part of what they're doing.
What's going on over in your world, Dave? Anything? I mean, that's what I see in my world is a bunch of attacks on gold and propaganda pieces. What do you see?
Well, we've seen the anti-gold propaganda flowing heavily since January. So, there's no reason now they come out and attack it in a new way. Oh, don't buy gold. You might buy something that's fake. I think the stock market's getting ready to roll over here. A good colleague and friend of mine pointed out that it looks like the dollar yen is going to start heading lower again, which means the yen is going to rise against the dollar. And that's been the lever that they've been using to manipulate the markets. And I think we're about ready to enter another cycle here where the yen appreciates versus the dollar, and we could start to see the stock market roll over. I mean, earlier this morning, it looked like the stock market was going to scream again. And in fact, I think the S&P was up 5 or 6 points at its high at one point, and it ended up closing the day red. So it just feels to me like the stock market's ready to roll over. But we'll see.
I'm sorry?
We shall see.
Yes, we shall. And gold was a little bit lower today than it's finishing out the day also. So it's kind of come back.
Right. Well, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to believe investing, the writers for investing.com, it's because the Fed is now hawkish on interest rates. So that's why gold went lower.
Wow.
Yeah, that's all I've got for today. Guess we can regroup a little bit later in the week, see what's going on. We'll see if I'm right about the stock market. The S&P closed today at 2048, so we'll see where it stands on Thursday.
Well, let me ask you this real quick before we end this. Craig Hemke over at TF Metals, he's been calling for the S&P to roll over by about 50%, and I've read since you and I spoke with him specifically about that a few months ago, I've read several articles along those same lines. I mean, do you think that we're getting ready to hit that type of a tipping point, or is this just going to be a small pullback in what your gut's telling you, or is this just a cliff dive?
Rory, I don't know. I actually, in my short sellers journal, every week I post a graph of the S&P 500, and I talk about what I think could happen from here. And at some point, we're going to get a greater than 50% sell-off in the stock market. But it's just a question of when. And no one can predict that. I don't even know if the Fed knows. And they're the ones who are trying to keep it manipulated higher. So
yeah,
it's just everything is just so tightly controlled, so tightly manipulated that at some point it's going to go off the rails and become completely unpredictable.
Well, haven't we already reached that point? I mean, where it is kind of unpredictable? I mean, because,
Yeah, well, that's where we are. It's unpredictable. Yeah. It's unpredictable what's going to happen and what's going to trigger it. And I honestly think they don't know either.
So it's just going to be a total black swan that just swoops in and that's it.
That's right.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. If you're in the system, then I hope that your binoculars are all cleaned up so you can see the black swan swooping in and hit the button before it lands. So, well, all right, Dave. I guess we'll pick it up again on Thursday and see what we got.
Yep, that sounds good.
All right, buddy. Have a good afternoon.
You too.